chimbilaco, vuela chimbilaco, vuela chimbilaco, vuela chimbilaco, vuela chimbilaco, vuela chimbilaco.
Hi, my name's Sarah Frazee and I'm with Meet Naturally Africa. I'm based here in Cape Town in South Africa, and I'm here to tell you a story because I have been a conservationist. I was a vegetarian for 18 years, and my reasons for being a vegetarian were because I was passionate about the environment. And now I run a meat business for exactly the same reasons. And I want to explain a little bit about why and how I got to the point where I recognized that actually eating meat here in Africa and eating the right kind of meat in the right proportions is actually the most appropriate thing one can do for preserving cultures and communities in Africa. So why is meat production an issue? And I think a lot of people know the carbon emission stories. A lot of people are very concerned about the animal welfare issues related to meat production. And a lot of that comes from kind of industrial production of meat, and also the consumption of industrial produced meat is also led to a lot of health issues in the developed world. But if you think about the African continent, it's a place where basically, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa, for millennia, the ecosystem was designed for huge herbivore pressure. Those images that you've seen with the classic wildebeest migration, huge herds of animals trampling, concentrating dung, grazing pressure, following the different seasons, following the rains across the continent, allowed for rest and regeneration system, but also a tremendous use and impact pressure from these grazing herbivore systems. The integration of predators in the ecosystem concentrated those animals so that they didn't graze one by one and were allowed to eat whatever little sweeties existed in the rangelands, but actually they had to eat whatever they came across because they stayed in a tight pack in order to avoid being munched and eaten themselves by a predator. And a guy by the name of Allan Savory came up with this kind of recognition that recreating these herds of herbivore pressure on Africa's ecosystems could be done with domestic animals as well in order to regenerate degraded ecosystems. Because Africa has 47% of the continent is rangeland, but 90% of that's been degraded. And a lot of that happened because despite the fact that humans and wildlife coexisted, if again you think of the classic image of the Maasai, for 2,000 years, while human systems were following the same migratory routes as wildlife. But when the culture started to settle and concentrate their impact, and then bring in breeds from Europe that were kind of less interested in staying in a tight pack and grazed along their own, this is when we had tremendous degradation because the areas were overgrazed, and the most palatable species were particularly overgrazed and were eliminated from the system, so you only would have kind of unpalatable species. So through this system of bringing animals together back into a village herd and regrazing them, a herder can really lead to restoration of these ecosystems. And I've been involved in some research both to see that using the herder has also reduced predation by predators on communal farmers, community-based farmers, livestock herds by 300%. And we were able to regenerate the soil carbon sequestration and bring back the carbon sequestration potential that rangelands have. And in fact, we found that if we could, there's 750 million hectares of degraded rangeland in Africa, and if we can restore only half of that in 17 countries on the continent, we basically could equal the same amount of carbon as the Amazon rainforest in South America. So really regenerative grazing, empowering herders with technologies and experience in order to herd in a way that mimics nature is actually part of the solution. And the only reason people will maintain that traditional way of lifestyle and investing instead of fences and in herding is if people continue to consume meat, but also are making good meat choices. So the consumption pattern is really critical because consumers are also obviously politicians, and really what's important in Africa at the moment is also making sure that it doesn't follow the same kind of trends towards industrial production. And this is a very, very interesting challenge at the moment, because actually meat consumption is, and the continental herd size of cattle and livestock is really only still growing in the African continent. Everywhere else it is decreasing. And this is a result of the fact that actually there's a growing middle class, or there was. I'm not so certain it's going to happen still with COVID, but the growing middle class is driving meat consumption, because for a long time, obviously, the poor population could not get enough protein, access to disposable income to purchase meat, and mostly ate a vegetarian diet. So meat was always a treat. So how do we maintain and allow for that aspirational growth of increased protein in the diet, but still use the farming techniques that evolved on the continent to graze in a way that mimics nature, that follows natural patterns, that is responsive to different climate trends, but also is regenerative to the soil carbon stocks. And so this is something that I'm super passionate about. Slow Food has been supporting this approach in South Africa, Botswana, and Mozambique. And yeah, it's really something that I think it's fantastic that a movement like Slow Food can help raise awareness that it's not just about always being a vegetarian or always being a vegan. It's about eating the food that is appropriate for that ecosystem, appropriate for that region, and ensuring that those farming methods are the ones that are promoting long-term sustainability of cultural and biodiversity. So thanks again, Slow Food.
Vuela Chimbilaco, vuela Chimbilaco, vuela Chimbilaco.